Okay, good. We got a recording icon, so I'm gonna begin with the um, public hearing notice. Per New Hampshire RSA 91A:2, subparagraph 3B, I've declared that the COVID-19 outbreak is an emergency, and I've waived the requirement that a quorum be physically present at the meeting pursuant to the governor's executive order 2020-04, section 8, as extended by executive order 2021-04, and emergency order number 12, section 3. Members will be participating remotely and will identify their location and any person present with them at that location. All votes will be by roll call. So I'll begin the meeting with roll call attendance. This is Mark Decotto. I am in my office at Waterville Valley and I'm alone. Joy?
I'm Joy Noel. I am in Newberry at my home, and I may have to get up periodically because I have a dog that keeps coming in and out.
Okay.
Oh, there
Phil?
she goes.
Phil?
Warren, I'm in my office in Meredith Town Hall, and there is no one else in here.
Okay, good. I'd like to begin as soon as Joy gets back with minutes review and approval. So let's take a look at the joint board minutes from March 30th. Has everyone had a chance to look at those?
Yes,
Okay, do I have a motion to approve?
motion to approve.
Okay,
I'll second that.
all right. And roll call vote, Joy
Yes,
and Phil,
Yes,
and Mark says yes. So minutes are approved as presented. Jim, would you like to give us a legislative update?
Yes, good morning, everybody. It's good to be with you again. As you know, we had legislative crossover in the House a week ago. It was 3 days of House sessions that took up all of the House originated bills and disposed of them finally, either passing them on to the Senate, finding them inexpedient, or in some cases, not getting to them at all, which was kind of an extraordinary maneuver, which Teresa and Kathy can weigh in a little bit more, but a number of bills were not taken up, which effectively killed them for the session as well. And so Teresa and Kathy are on the call today. I think Kathy may be having technical difficulties. So while she gets herself squared away, Teresa, do you want to jump in?
Here.
Yeah,
Here.
great. And
Yep,
give a little
yep.
bit of an overview.
Yep. One of the things that I think is just fascinating is the House had their 3 days of the Sportsplex in Bedford, working on all bills. As you know, every bill has to have a hearing. Every bill has to be voted on by the House or the Senate. And then those that are voted positively pass to the other body. Well, the 3 days of the Sportsplex was spent mainly arguing, and they argued about procedure. They argued about everything. It was really unbelievable. The calendar had been divided in, and there's a reason I'm getting really technical here. The calendar was divided into part 1, part 2, and part 3. Normally, every committee, the calendar goes Commerce Committee, Criminal Justice Committee, they do all the bills. Well, they had commerce bills in all 3 parts. So at about 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon, they got to part 3. And the speaker immediately said, well, we have to be out of here by 7 o'clock because the Sportsplex has another booking. And so all the bills in part 3 are going to be laid on the table. Well, instead of just deciding to vote on all of them in a bulk, they went one by one, and it was taking about 20 minutes per bill. It was really quite interesting. So what ended up happening is over 70 bills never had action. And so therefore, if you go on to the House docket and look at a bill, it says miscellaneous. Well, there's no miscellaneous category in House rules. So right now, we don't have a clue what's really going to happen with these miscellaneous bills. They haven't crossed over. They need 2/3 of a vote if they're laid on the table at this point, which they're not. So it's a little bit peculiar. The reason I'm telling you this is in New Hampshire, I think we're now becoming like other states that have a lot of power in whoever's in leadership. Because in other states, at times people will put bills in a drawer and they won't get heard for years. All of a sudden, we have a situation where the speaker held, and a lot of these bills were 10-9. The speaker held these bills, and lo and behold, nobody knows what's going to happen on them. So it's a little bit up in the air. Also, as you know, the budget has passed the House. It has a lot of things on it that the governor does not like. I was very surprised, and the governor was very clear before the vote that he thought the House budget was off the rails, and there are a lot of things he didn't like. And still that budget passed with only 2 Republicans voting no. And I would have told you, this is why you really don't listen to me. I would have told you, I thought there would have been a lot of what I call the moderate Republicans who would have voted no. But only 2 voted no. And so the budget passed. It's started in the Senate now. It's got all sorts of things. And Kathy, if she doesn't have technical difficulty, can go into more details on the education part. But we'll see what the Senate's going to do. I think they are totally powerful at the moment, and it's going to be very interesting. I will say on another venue, there are a lot of education bills that are retained or re-referred. I think when you look at Jim's memo about a communications plan, there's some tremendous opportunity to maybe as those bills work through the summer and fall that are retained and re-referred, there may be some good messaging opportunity there. There are a few bills that are moving forward, may have some good messaging opportunity. We'll see. Kathy, are you? I see you're there.
You're muted.
Teresa, I have a
Hey.
question. The fact that those bills have become miscellaneous, which is not even a term, does
Right.
that mean that they can be taken up again next year? Whereas
I
normally,
think so. Yes, I
Yeah.
think so. Yeah, I think so, because they don't have a vote. And some of them were coming out of committee ITL 11-10. Some of them are coming ought to pass 11-10. So yeah, I think they can.
Yeah.
And the real question is going to be, because they have the House does not have a position on them. Their position is miscellaneous.
So they're like zombies. I mean, they're not dead, but
Yeah,
they're not alive either.
Yeah, you're exactly right. They're zombies. You're exactly right. And normally you see that the House and the Senate putting a lot of bills on the table. And what they'll do is they'll pass a bill and then put it on the table. And they do that, so therefore they've got a position, a House or Senate position that ought to pass. And then they can take it and amend another bill, for example, put it on the budget or put it on any other bill, because they've got a House or Senate position, because they took a position and then they tabled it. In this case, they haven't taken any position.
So,
And it's pretty much like re-referred bills where they're still sitting in the committee, but these are different because the committees voted on them, but the House hasn't acted.
Okay.
so miscellaneous versus retained on our sheet. Is it correct to assume that beginning in the fall, we will have to contend with anything on this list that says miscellaneous or retained?
I would assume that anything on that sheet that says re-referred or re-referred or retained, it's going to be taken up anytime from now to November 1. They have to be, have the retained and re-referred bills, I think it's November 10th, have to have been voted on by the committee by November 10th. Those, and when I say between now and November, if a committee finishes this work, say by the beginning of May, they may decide to take up retained bills later in May so they don't have to do anything in June or July. But yes, those retained and re-referred bills will be worked on and the committee will have to vote on them by November. So then the full House will vote or Senate will vote on them at the beginning of January. The miscellaneous is anybody's guess. I mean, the committee's already worked on them, so they won't go back to the committee. And I don't, since they didn't lay them on the table and crossovers passed, I don't think those bills can have anything happen to them other than they can be introduced again for next year.
They can't be just tacked on to another bill like a little Christmas tree ornament.
Well, they can, but the House doesn't have a position on it. So if the
Okay.
Senate really decided some of those bills look interesting, they can kind of do anything they want. They can tack it on. But the House doesn't have a position. So when they go to the committee of conference, they don't have a leg to stand on.
Okay.
So I know I didn't give you a really definitive answer, but it's really Never Neverland.
Well, I appreciate you taking us by the hand on this.
Well, and
We're
it's,
taking each other by the end of this. It's crazy.
it's good. I mean, it's enlightening to know that we basically have to worry about just about every bill.
That's
And
it.
Right.
Like
Right.
every bill,
You're
is
right.
it seems
You're
to
right.
me to be in play right now.
Right. Well, and also take that as an opportunity. Is once you get your messaging down pat, it might be an opportunity to message all over the place.
Right. So
Yeah.
this summer messaging could be important.
Very.
Yeah.
Very. Yes.
I have a question, Mark.
Yeah.
Paul DeShane from Newington. You haven't stated, I look at the spreadsheet and I can only identify 2 bills that are in the miscellaneous category, and they're, one is a constitutional amendment, and the other is, I guess, some House resolution. Are there any others of our concern that are in that miscellaneous pile that could resurrect as a zombie, as George puts it?
I think on the miscellaneous pile, to tell you the truth, those you are not going to see anybody talking about because the committee's already worked on it. So you're not going to see the House do anything on those bills. And the
But
only
that's not my
question,
point. My question is, are they education funding related in that pile?
I think, Paul,
I-
your question is beyond the 2 that we've flagged, are there any other in the miscellaneous pile of concern for our purposes? I think the answer is no. Teresa or Kathy can confirm that. I think the vast majority of the others have been retained or re-referred, so are still in play, but not falling into that kind of gray area.
Okay.
Thank you.
that's right.
Anything? Yeah, go ahead, Jane.
I recall that there is a reduction in SWEPT in the budget, an actual reduction. And I don't know if Kathy, you were going to address that. I just find it confusing, SWEPT calculations anyway. And I just wanted to throw that out to the group to try to explain what that might look like to municipalities and what that impact might be.
There is a reduction in the SWEP in the budget. And I listened to some of those hearings. I must say it was really hard because not being able to be there. let's just say, I'm not sure what's going to happen when things get to the Senate. I'm not so sure you're going to see any of the education stuff exactly the way it started out, except maybe some of the construction things, but I'm not so sure. So I think time's going to tell on what's going to happen on that.
And the only reason that I ask is that most of these towns obviously raise excess SWIFT, and that excess SWIFT is retained locally and used for our school budgets. So, you know, that's just I'm just trying to figure out if in fact there's a reduction overall for SWIFT, is it simply that the local education tax would then be raised to accommodate for budgets? And how that impacts timing wise with this budget. It just seems, I'm just not really clear on how that works or how it might work if it was reduced overall for everybody in the state. I think they took like 100 million off what's supposed to be raised by everybody. And I just don't know what the practical application of that might be to our coalition community members.
And you know, I didn't see, I don't know whether Kathy's on and out off of technical difficulties. I didn't see any town by town charts on any of this in Division 2. Certainly it wasn't on the full committee. It's going to be very interesting because, as you know, they have done some things to be really positive to towns and counties, and some things not to. They're, for example, making sure the counties are paying less or have less of an increase in county funds to the nursing homes. They're doing revenue sharing, but I have to tell you, their math is what I call funny math. So that's why I say I'm not really sure what's going to happen there. And I thought they were putting it off for a year.
I will just jump in on this real quickly and add, Jane, and for everybody. So Senate Finance right now is having presentations made to it concerning the budget. The Department of Education will be in front of Senate Finance a week from today. I think it's next Monday afternoon.
It is.
Yeah, so I think it's next Monday at 3. So, you know, we might consider having the committee ask that question and try and tee it up so we can get some clarity from everybody involved. But we'll be monitoring it generally. We could also approach it that way.
Okay, anything else? Any other questions, legislative update wise? All right, if not, let's.
May I just say,
yeah.
follow up on what Jim said? I think that's a really good idea. And so I think if between now and Friday, you all have any questions like James about the SWIFT, we may be able to feed them to some of the members of the committees so they can ask Commissioner Edelblut specifically, what exactly does this mean? And what's the practical application? And does this mean exactly what you said, Jane? Does it mean towns are going to be having to raise this money themselves? Because I will say this is the problem with COVID. In the House, you had these remote hearings, and I have to tell you, I'm not sure anybody really was on top of what was going on, because it was almost as if some of these people had talked themselves behind closed doors and this was the way it was going to happen. And you didn't have really a lot of ability for the public to ask questions. I think it'll be better in the Senate than it is in the House, but I think we can certainly tee up the questions if you just let us know what you're concerned about.
Yeah, I think Jane's question is critical for every community in the state to understand, especially if something's going to change as a result of adopting the budget, because people don't understand exactly what that means. It isn't like there's a topic for a typical bill or something like that that you can track and understand what it's about. I mean, the budget just encompasses so much that that's going to get lost in the shuffle. So I think that question about how this impacts every community's SWEP is very important to understand.
I think that we need to make clear that each town is dealing with so many uncertainties these days that we need as much clarification as possible to know where our footing is on finances. And we realize the state has this problem too, but they're the ones that are making the budget, and we have to know how it's going to come down on us.
Right.
Well, yeah, you're right, because you've got the retirement system, you've got the school funding. I mean, you've got a ton of stuff that is being impacted. What I will do is I'll call this afternoon the LBA and that's the Legislative Budget Office, and I'll just ask them if they have any sheets that they have done that they've given to members, but not the rest of us, that would show the impact in SWEP and any impact in general to the communities of everything that's happening. I'll see what they say. My guess is they'll say no, but at least we're teeing it up, so maybe they'll start thinking about it.
Well, plus we can say then that we have begged for information which we have not been given.
Exactly. No, you're exactly right. And I can certainly call also the finance committee, the administrative assistant, and say, oh, by the way, do you guys have anything on this? Because I'm not finding it, and I don't know how you can do a budget without knowing what the impact is.
Yeah.
So I'll do that. We'll see.
Thank you.
We'll see what they say. Thanks.
Okay, and we do have a question in the chat from Dave McGuckin asking about the miscellaneous process. I think, Dave, at least what I'm hearing, and Jim, Teresa, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't know what the process is. Because
I think that, yeah, that's right, Mark. And I saw the remainder of his question in the chat. It looked like he was, would there be action taken without notice? Is that possible?
right.
And while this is a gray area where these bills have kind of been dropped into this, again, this otherwise undefined status, the House still has rules on, concerning its actions. And I don't know, Teresa, I find it hard to believe they're going to find a way to dispose of those bills without some notice being calendared. There's already a great deal of turmoil over this decision. And I'd be surprised if there was an action taken that just simply disposed of them without anything further.
I don't think you'll see any action taken in the House. I think where the concern is if there are those in the Senate who were hoping some of those bills would pass the House. They may take the language and put it on a Senate bill, and then it would have to go back to the House for a committee of concurrence or non-concurrence. So we're just going to have to keep our eyes open to everything that's going on the Education Committee and other places, and particularly the budget, and watch. I think that's where we might see it, but that I don't think you'll see these bills themselves disposed of.
Okay, good. Thank you, Teresa. Okay, let's move forward. If there's nothing else, let's move forward to the communication plan. Jim, you want to take the lead?
Sure. Thanks, Mark. And again, thank you, everybody. So what I put together here and I shared on Friday is a proposed plan and timetable for this year. Understanding, of course, that there'll be issues coming ahead next year, but as I indicated in here, it's difficult to plan that far ahead without having some flexibility about where we want to go and what we want to do. But I think for the remainder of the legislative session through the summer and the fall, I think we can fairly definitively articulate points that I would recommend to you to do a couple of things, to hone our message, to amplify that message, and then to manage that process. And so what I've done here, and in lieu of going through it line by line, because there are a lot of entries in here, I want to talk about some general themes, and then I guess open up for a discussion and questions you may have concerning it. But I think in the short term, the couple of the key steps that I envision, and Teresa alluded to this in her comments concerning the legislative process. We do have some bills that are still alive that give us the opportunity, whether with the Senate or back with the House, to engage. That may be either through oral testimony that we have you provide, or whether through a letter, to put us on record with legislative leaders about our concerns and our issues. I do think an op-ed would be appropriate. I suggest that as a tool to use in a few places in here. But I think where the coalition has newly come together, that would be appropriate to articulate in a written piece that we could then disseminate to opinion leaders and elected leaders that we care about. What the point of what the underlying issue is, why these communities have come together once again, and expectations on a moving forward basis. Part of this, we've talked about the creation of a website and a social media presence. So I've been tasked with finding a developer. I will be following up separately on that very shortly with a proposal to get a website underway. And I have that occurring over the next 4 to 6 weeks to get that online. And then we move forward, and this becomes a hybrid of a messaging, but also a grassroots document, because I envision educational and outreach opportunities in here, identifying messaging surrogates to go beyond yourselves to help promote the message that we are jointly conveying here, and build some momentum and some ground game for your position to make sure that whatever comes forward, we're prepared for and we're engaged on, and something that once we have kind of these early elements nailed down, and an op-ed announcement, a website, a messaging piece, I envision doing a one-page. I think some of us may assume that education funding has been discussed for so long that folks have a very clear understanding of what it means and what the issues are. And I don't like to assume that. The legislature turns over by a third every 2 years. Some of the folks coming in will be familiar and facile with the issues. Some will be completely new to it. So part of that is an education campaign as well. So in any event, I'm happy to take on any of the points in here you'd like to drill down on further. I will then point out, before we do that, just at the end, a logistical piece. We dealt with this a few weeks ago, and I think, Mark, it was your recommendation that this group kind of weigh in on a logistical process by which, when media inquiries come in, we get a statement approved and out in a timely fashion. So I've laid out here what I think is a reasonable approach that my first blush would be to get this joint board's input and approval. Sometimes we'll have time to do that. Sometimes we may be on a deadline where we have to consider other alternatives, but my mantra typically is measure twice and cut once. And so I want to be thoughtful about making sure that the message that we convey on behalf of the coalition is one that you're comfortable with and that you agree with. So I've laid that out as well. I'm happy to discuss that in addition. So, but in any event, with that, I'm happy to talk about any aspect of this and answer the questions you may have.
Okay, so yeah, Paul.
Yeah, first of all, great first effort. Appreciate it a lot, and certainly I've been advocating that. I have a couple questions that are basically to clarify the intent, make sure I understand it. But I'll first also say that under the overview, the messaging bullet is probably the most important piece of the whole plan. You've laid out a pretty good logistical effort, but until we decide what our message is, we're not really necessarily know the audience we're targeting, and that's going to change your logistics. So I fully and most heartily agree. We need to have maybe a larger group session to speak openly about the mission and distill those down to particular talking points so that it's clear, it's unanimously endorsed, and then we can identify, okay, with that message, what audiences need to hear it. So that's a great effort. Under the first effort, they're talking about developing one-page explanatory collateral piece. Is that like a flat fact sheet?
Yeah,
It's an elevator speech.
Yeah, exactly. It's something that we would provide as we have meetings with people. It'd be kind of our distilled iteration of that messaging. And to your first point, Paul, you're exactly right. And that's why I flag in there. I think a separate facilitated meeting that we would undertake to get beyond kind of the top line messaging that we understand, but really think through the whys of it, right? The consequences if we do this, and typically do an analysis of that, I think would be helpful. I do think the logistics in here will work, basically regardless of what our message is. But it's like meant as a framework that we can fine tune as we go, and that's what I envision. But so A, yes, I agree, a meeting would be helpful, and B, that's exactly right. So if we meet with a opinion leader or a legislator, we have a conversation, we have a leave behind that, gives them, so they have something to take away and recall our conversation with some of those top points.
So just one thing on that.
Okay.
When we have that larger meeting to do that, should we have a starting point with some bullet points to kind of guide the conversation? Or is that going to start out just as an open meeting? How do you envision that practically happening?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I envision the latter. I think that I think that we have a sense of what that starting point is.
Okay.
I think, quite honestly, it could be in the process of writing a 750-word op-ed that we could essentially articulate this and use that as the foundation on which we build and think of different approaches to emphasize certain points. But I think that we have enough knowledge amongst us that we can have that kind of meeting with that foundation intact versus just kind of starting from scratch, because we're not doing that. We do have a sense of what we are and what we're doing.
So we would go back to basically the mission that we had in the engagement, right?
Yep.
With you all. And that's kind of the starting point, but leave it pretty open-ended other than that.
I think so. And I think that'll facilitate some ideas and some thoughts. But I think we do have that foundation that we can start from. Yes.
And that way we get everybody's ideas on everything. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. Paul, I'm sorry, I didn't.
No, stay on topic. I was just moving on. One of the things that struck me in the logistics and the strategic outline here is that you appear to, and I agree, op-ed pieces are great places to introduce yourself and lay frameworks to get your message out. But you seem to revolve or rotate the op-ed pieces. You identify the union leader first, then the New Hampshire Business Review, and then later the Portsmouth Herald. Is that a strategic decision that you find it's more effective to rotate throughout the state to different media outlets or newspapers more specifically, versus okay, let's do an op-ed and we hit all the editorial pages all at once so that the entire state is covered simultaneously with this same op-ed? So I was just curious about that strategic decision, if it was one.
Yeah, sure, Paul. So typically with an op-ed, multiple newspapers aren't going to accept the same piece and run it. They typically, so if occasionally you'll see a newspaper that sees a piece printed and they'll say, oh, we'd like to have that as well. But more often than, the vast majority of the time, a newspaper is going to have the exclusive right to run that op-ed. And so it's more of a strategic point to hit different targets and different audiences. And so And I would say that we shouldn't limit ourselves. We can do a lot of writing, but I'd also say, for example, if we just said the union leader is the only statewide paper in the state, let's just continue to pound them. At some point, the reality is going to sink in that they're not, they have the option of whether or not to run our piece. And I'm confident, and I get pieces placed there with some regularity. But if we hit them with a steady stream of school funding op-eds, more likely than not, at some point, they're going to just say, we've had enough of this for now and move on. And so, again, I think we can move as we go along. If we have a sense of a certain area that, we have some legislators out here that we care about or some opinion leaders we care about, but it's typically not going to be an option for us to have a piece published in multiple newspapers at once. Now that then we augment when we do a piece in any of the given newspapers. We'll have a website we can promote it to, and social media we can promote it to, and obviously any piece that we do like that, we're going to be sending out a blind copy email to an array of legislators and opinion leaders and community and business officials throughout the state to say, in case you missed it, see this. And so I envision using these pieces in multiple different ways. But in any event, I do think typically moving it around a little bit is helpful.
All good points. Thank you. Under the second time frame, the May-June 2021, the second bullet, it reads about beginning to identify potential Coalition 2 messaging surrogates, legislative champions, community business leaders, and civic leaders. Might I add identifying strategic alliances? Because I don't think we've had much of a discussion, are there other groups out there that have commonalities with us that we can leverage both our voices in there? For instance, if the BIA has an interest in school funding and certainly corporate taxes, how is that fashioned to both our benefits? Even the school funding project, although I think there are divergences here and there, I think there are some commonalities on some principles, particularly when we articulate our message. So I think it's important to identify that we need to have strategic alliances identified in that process too.
I think that's a great point, Paul. I will add that.
Good, thank you. Moving on to the August-September timeframe, and throughout the document, you've articulated nicely to identify opportunities where new messaging is possible, either by new bills being introduced or other efforts. But I heard no mention of what about bills that are held over? And we just, after our previous discussion, just had a number of bills that are being retained and will be discussed in the fall.
Yeah.
Those present other opportunities, and did I just miss it, or
I would say, Paul, it's implied, not expressed. Yes, we will be following throughout all the retained and re-referred bills that are hung over, held over, and so
accurately, that was a Freudian slip.
Maybe, yeah. But no, that certainly is something that, as we look at opportunities, if a hearing is held on a retained bill that we care about, we'll look at that same messaging opportunity. So I look at it as implied in here, but I'm certainly happy to add that so it's an express point. But we certainly contemplate on our side exactly, through our legislative work. And again, I look at these two going in parallel with one another. So when we see that, we track those bills, we see that opportunity, we're going to try and maximize it on your behalf. So yes.
Great. That's all I have for comments on the substance of the plan. I do have one more comment relative to that decision-making matrix when media inquiries come in. So I'll hold my comments on that unless there's other comments on the substance of the plan.
Bill, Joy, are you okay? I have gone through and just looked at each one of those bullet points. Thank you, Paul, for your comments. I didn't see anything that I really questioned other than understanding the op-ed piece as well. So Phil, did you have anything on it?
No, I'm good with it the way it is.
Joy? Because I.
I'm fine.
Okay.
I'm fine with it. And I think it does make sense to direct our op-ed pieces to one at a time, because we want each paper to feel that they are special and they are our focus, because we know news people think that they are God's helpers.
Well, the only question that I had, and Jim, you explained it a little bit, was I wasn't sure, given the status of all of the bills and how everything is kind of in a pause mode, it seems, when it comes to education funding, is getting the op-ed out right now. And so I understand that we're laying the groundwork, but can you explain a little bit more why you think this is the right time to do that?
So thanks. That's a great question, Mark. And I do look at it foundation laying, and one thing that we haven't talked about yet, and as we kind of think about the various things that are happening, it is true most of the bills have been retained, a few have gone forward, and the budget will continue to talk about SWEP funding and how that works. But we also have the Conval case, which, as we know, has been sent back for further consideration. And I know Jane is on. There's a structuring conference that's been scheduled. Jane, do you want to, maybe we're going to do this later, but if you want to just briefly speak to that. I look at that as we now be publicly out there, that'll be another avenue for us to maybe express ourselves and take advantage of opportunities. Jane, did you want to jump in on that?
Sure. Thanks, Jim. Yeah, there is a structuring conference on the remanded Conval case this Wednesday at 1:30. I have contacted the court. I'm not a party, but I've been listening in on the priors, so I'll be able to listen in on that structuring conference as well. Because the plaintiff's motion for summary judgment, there were cross motions for summary judgment, which basically means the court decides everything on what it reads and the documentation that's been submitted, as opposed to hearings. And the state's motion for summary judgment was denied, but the plaintiff's motion for summary judgment was remanded, which means there's going to be evidence. There's going to be very likely trials or additional motions for summary judgment. So what this is going to do, it's going to set up the schedule. It's going to set up what the parties, I think, need for time, and what they plan on do through deadlines for filing, perhaps, and for setting up for trials if need be. But they're going to be able to get that time to get whatever evidence they need to submit to the court. And I think that was one of the issues that was in controversy. And so it's hard to say. I mean, the structuring conference is in April, which is obviously right away, right after the remand, but a lot will tell as far as what the schedule is moving forward. They may even have a scheduling conference after this structuring conference. So we'll know a lot more once those deadlines have been set. However, both parties would have the right to appeal whatever ultimate decision this Conval case was. And I would be, because this topic is so complex, I wouldn't be surprised if further appeals were taken ultimately for whatever the decision on the remand is. Obviously, that's just me guessing. So it could take a while to churn this through again, like it did the first time, but we'll know more as the hearings are scheduled.
Right. Thank you, Jane. And I just would add then, Mark, that while I don't envision Wednesday being a messaging event, I mean, it's a very highly technical discussion between the lawyers and the judge as to, okay, how many days where we do, interrogatories, depositions, and that kind of thing. It does underscore for me that on this other track, there is this other process underway that as it moves forward, there will be opportunities for us. And my sense is there's a general awareness, but not a really broad one. I think we probably have enough to develop a piece and publish it. We know the opposing side is out there. We've heard them and we see them. And so I don't think it'd be a bad thing to pop your head up now and essentially say, we're here and we're engaged, because what we also don't know is what other discussions may be underway. And my view is we want to make sure you have a seat at every table possible to make sure that your message is heard and understood and amplified. And so my sense is while people are paying attention in Concord, even if they're doing it by remote, work on this piece and then begin to implement this plan in kind of a steady fashion so that as we move into the summer and fall, we're in a good position for whatever may come, whether it's through the lawsuit, legislatively or otherwise.
Okay, I just wanted to understand that a little bit more. So, okay, thank you. Any other questions? Because I do want to move on to the, yeah, go ahead, Paul.
As I alluded to just a bit earlier, I did have one comment on the decision-making matrix.
That's the piece I wanted to move on to now.
Oh, okay, good, good. Actually, I have no disagreement with any part of it. I think it lays it out fairly simple. The only thing I was going to suggest or add is under point G, when the situation is occurring where a consensus of the joint board or the chair can't be obtained. Yeah, I think, you know, the safest course of action is to, you know, we have no comment at this time because we don't have a consensus or et cetera. But I would also suggest or add, and Jim, I'd like to hear your perspective, but, you know, in the coming days, we will have a response. You know, and one thing when the media calls and there's a finite expiration date on the topic, yeah, you missed that one advance and you're not going to get another follow-up article on it. This is such a time and true and long-lasting topic. I would suspect any reporter would take any amount of extra copy in subsequent days just to keep the mileage running on it,
Right.
because this topic is going to go. So that was my only other suggestion is dangle in front of them. Well, we may not have comment now, but you know, I'll get back to you tomorrow with something more definitive.
Yeah, I'm certainly comfortable with that, Paul. I agree with you. It more, you know, if it's one of those where they're on a deadline, the story goes out without us, even if they don't write again, I certainly like building the muscle memory with them that we will be responsive. It just, you know, it may not always be on their timetable, and they understand that. They know that sometimes that is the way it is. But it also helps. I want them to know our message and to know our position, and it helps color their reporting going forward. So I'm certainly comfortable with that. Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Well, isn't there's going to be a certain amount of discretion on your part too, Jim, because I think I understand where you want to make sure that everybody's behind whatever the answer is. And I think that's great. However, there are sometimes you're going to be asked a question that's just the standard, you know, and we're going to have that message. So I'd like to know what Phil and Joy think, but you know, if something is clearly you're able to answer it within the context of our one pager, I'm comfortable with you answering that question and then saying that we'll provide additional information, you know, in the coming days or whatever, as Paul has suggested. But I don't think I would rather get an answer like that that's on our standard message than I would saying no comment at this time, but we'll get back to you. How do other people feel about that?
Mark, I'm inclined to agree. I think that more often than not, the question would be answered by the statement that we work up ahead of time. They're going to rephrase the question, but the answer is always going to be the same, that we are opposed to the reinstatement of towns paying the board, you know, bearing the burden for the entire state. So I think that you are absolutely right, that we can, in most cases, Jim can just answer.
Yeah.
I would agree with that as well.
I appreciate the point, Mark, and I think you'll understand why I'm being cautious, only because I know we've got a large group here. And but you're right, some of these questions are probably going to become fairly pro forma. We're able to respond. In addition, and this goes to the Conval point, but you know, other points as well, with some degree now on a going forward basis, we should be able to anticipate media events.
Right.
And so there will be times when it may make sense to draft a statement in advance. So we're able to kind of get that into the hopper and have it available. And so in any event, I certainly comfortable doing that as well to make sure that we're all squared away before we, get one of those rushed deadline calls.
Yeah, and I think following steps A through F in every instance and doing everything we can to make sure that it's a coordinated and approved message, but there may be those situations when that's just not possible and you have to react. And I just think that if it's a simple enough answer to give, that's better than the no comment type of approach. That's all.
Yep. Okay.
I think,
Understood.
yeah, so any other comments on the overall communications plan? How do we want to proceed with, is this something that we're looking for the board to approve and then bring to the membership at the next meeting? Or is this an internal document for us? How do you guys want to handle this?
Mark,
Yeah. Phil.
wouldn't it make sense to incorporate some of the items that Paul had brought up and the discussion had brought up, bring it back to this group, we agree on it, and then give it to the full board to approve?
I'm fine doing that. And just one clarification while we have Jane here, maybe she can answer this. As far as 91A is concerned, the idea of sharing with the board, this board, a messaging or something like that, as long as we're responding back to Jim, we're okay, right? As far as getting input from folks, do you see that as a violation? I'm sorry to ask.
Typical
that.
lawyer answer, it depends. Sure.
Yeah.
The team, the lobbying team would agree. I mean, I think, I do feel that even though we have a large group and a diverse membership, I do think that I know how we did it for the memorandum of understanding. Only a few folks actually sent in red line changes on that but we had lots of public discussion, when we had a lot of meetings, and I would err on the side of including everyone in the conversation, having them weigh in on what they want to see, and then creating a document after the fact, as opposed to doing it the other way. I just felt like it might take more meetings than you want to do, but I think people were happier with the product, even though we had a lot of meetings on the MOU, and they were involved in the discussions with it. And that would just be my recommended approach, unless anyone has
Okay,
other
so
thoughts.
we'll just take a conservative approach and try to get everybody together when it's possible. And if it's not, we'll follow this criteria.
And you can send that out in your notice and saying,
Yeah.
this is the document that's going to be discussed. That's all public notice, and please have your comments ready for the meeting, and then have the meeting, and then orally everybody can kind of, vet whatever the comments are.
Okay.
And again, like you said before, could something come from the joint board for circulation? Could it be vetted in advance? But it sounds like this group decided that no, we're just going to go straight to our membership to have that conversation.
I think it makes people feel better if they know where their money's going.
Yeah. So the steps we'll take on this then, Jim, Paul, go ahead.
Kind of a follow-up question to your question, and whether Jane or Jim or anyone else in the Bernstein bullpen can address this. I think the document we have right now is certainly a public document. We're in a public meeting, we're discussing it, and it's at a high enough level that it doesn't present a controversy or conflict for the group as a whole. But at what point, if at all, can we, I guess, determine that this is becoming more confidential? I'll use the example of what I suggested, identifying strategic partners. we may not want that publicly disclosed as we're debating who's a partner and who's not a partner. Do we have an exemption anywhere in 91A that we could hang our hat in those discussions? Is Bernstein Sure then an attorney of record, and therefore we're meeting with attorney on that particular issue? Or I don't know, I struggle because the document's fine right now, but as we've turned the dial and get further and further granular, there's going to come a point in time where I think there's going to be discomfort in having that level of discussion in a public forum for the reasons cited.
I don't know.
It's not hitting an exemption straight out. You know, I'll have to review 91A, but you know, it's certainly not a private business transaction and that sort of thing. One of the things could be how you ask for your ambassadors to do the outreach. So for instance, if you know, members are going to reach out in advance before they propose, a potential partner, kind of do some vetting in advance, letting whatever entity know that this is going to be discussed in a public meeting, and are they comfortable with that? I don't think there's any brainstorming. Is just brainstorming. It's not committing the entity to join us. It's us, kind of brainstorming and figuring out who we might want to reach out to. But I'll have to look at the 91A, and I'll defer to Bernstein Sure on this too. How have you done this in the past? We can't be the first folks that you've met with that's a group that's trying to do some PR type of work that might need some conversations with various other stakeholders.
Yeah, I think so I'm not the expert on 91A, so I don't have the facility really to address the nuances of the law and how it applies here. I do want to err, and I think as do you, from what I'm hearing, err on the side of disclosure and transparency. That's what we're doing here. But recognizing what Paul said, I think it's worth a further conversation and review on our joint parts here.
And one of the uniqueness of this group is that we're all public entities.
Right.
And they're very, very clearly under 91A, whereas you might have other groups that have a public face share, but they're not governmental entities and therefore don't fall under that added disclosure and transparency. I'm not looking to be, clandestine in any way, shape, or form, but I can just see our conversations at some juncture reaching out. Boy, I really don't want to talk about this in public because it would put us at a detrimental point if discussed publicly. And that maybe just a discomfort we'll have to accept, but let's talk about it beforehand.
Yeah.
If I could add, I think too, as the statements and the op-eds are drafted, I think that's going to be something that is going to be out there then in the public eye. And I think constituencies that are interested in this group may in fact contact us, if there's a website and that sort of thing. One of the things you could do is invite those folks to the public meeting and kind of talk about where the points of intersection might be. I mean, I think that it's, I think that there are going to be different points of intersection with different groups on this issue. I don't think all the groups that we may partner with are going to have the exact same, stake or hit on all points, but there may be some points that we all agree on. And I think as this conversation moves forward and this issue is still moving forward, there's a lot of potential for bringing folks in, or them coming to us, even on this issue, because I do think it's a complex one that is going to require a concerted effort to get all constituencies together to try to resolve this ed funding piece.
Okay, well, we will, so on the communication plan document, we're gonna revise it with some of the input that we've had today and bring it back to the full joint board. And then we will have a final review and approve it for bringing it to the whole group.
Okay, all right.
That'll be an agenda item for the next meeting. All right, the next item I just want to move along here, if we can, is budget review. And what is our, I guess I'll begin by saying that I've spoken with Judy Belanger. I provided her with the last update that list that Paul did. Instructed her that these are the amounts to bill to each of the towns, and that it was my understanding, and I think all of our understanding, that if any of the communities had a balance that they had been notified about, and that they had written back to the city of Portsmouth and said what to do with it, that those balances could be applied to these amounts. And I asked Judy to go through, let me know if there were any questions, but that we were ready to bill based on those numbers on Paul's last list. I have not gotten any feedback from her that that's been done. I know that Dave had asked in the chat what the status of that billing was. So I will follow up with Judy and find out where she is on that. But I would anticipate that if the bills have not gone out, then they will be going out relatively quickly here. I thanked her for her staff support of us. I know it's kind of a pain. But I appreciate the finance office in Portsmouth doing this for us. I do have one question that's related for the other board members. I've been notified by the Springfield Board of Selectmen that they want to become full members.
Right.
They are waiting for that final decision to know what the assessment would be. I asked Paul to recalculate the list with Springfield included. It ended up being a relatively small amount in the recalculation. It came out to only $375 for this year. I personally think that we should just, and I'm throwing this out for a motion to either approve this idea or not. But I think we should bill Springfield to $375, not change anyone else on the list from the first set of assessments. It'll give us a surplus of $375 that we can take care of later. But it doesn't force Judy and her staff to go back, and if they are in the midst of doing the billing right now, to go back and make all kinds of changes on everybody's bill. Because as an example, it changed Portsmouth's assessment, which is the largest impact, by $63. So it's not an appreciable amount. And we can take care of it when we settle up at the end of the year, if that's all right with everybody.
Okay, so you're making a motion that we recalculate effective December 31.
If we can recalculate, we can use the recalculated numbers for 22. Yes, Joy. But for this year, my motion would be to just bill them $375 balance it out on 12/31/21, and then
Okay.
bill based on the 22 assessments revised that Paul did.
Okay, so that is your motion. I will second it.
Okay, Phil, you okay with that approach?
Absolutely.
All right, so I'll take a vote, Joy
Yes.
and Phil,
Yes.
and Mark's yes. So it's on the record that we will notify, I will call back and email Springfield and let them know that their assessment's 375. And Dave, if Dave is still listening, I will also check on making sure that those bills are going out with the finance office, unless Jane wants to do that for me.
Well, I can do that, but,
Okay.
you know, I think there might be another question for you too, Mark. So
Oh,
if you
okay,
wouldn't mind reaching out to Judy. But the other thing we might need from Springfield, I believe, is the executed memorandum of understanding page,
Okay.
which would be
yes,
great.
I will let them know, yes. And they've already voted on it. It was a contingent vote that they just needed to know the amount. Any other questions? I will reach out to Judy. Jane, I'll take care of that. Anything else on the budget that we need to go over? Jim, do you have anything?
Mark, just real quick, because I want to update our lobbyist registration. When we filed it with an addendum just indicating all the communities.
Mhm.
So can I update with Springfield at this point?
Yes. Oh,
Okay.
no, let me email you back. I just want to confirm, but
Okay.
I can make that phone call today, and I should have something for you by tomorrow morning.
That's fine.
Okay.
I'll wait to hear from you. Thanks.
All right. Other business. I had two things. Go ahead, Paul.
No, go ahead, Mark. I didn't, I do have something, but go ahead.
My other business items, two things were, on Thursday, the governor's press conference, he indicated that May 7th, all of the guidance for Safer at Home is going to change as of May 7th, and it's going to become a set of best management practices. I do not know, I haven't heard anything about what those best management practices are going to actually be. So I don't know the actual impact on the conduct of electronic public meetings, but I know there's also some technicalities about maintaining emergency orders so that federal funding can still be used for some of these things. But I think we need to start considering how we're going to conduct business, whether it's immediately after May 7th or, beginning of June or whatever. I think we need to have a plan for how to conduct business if we no longer can read this statement at the beginning of an electronic meeting. So my first question is, Jim, do you have any idea where the legislature is on is it Senate Bill 91, 92, something like that, with the electronic meetings going forward?
I can't say that I am. I think Teresa and Kat's still on. Do you have any idea on the bill Mark is referencing? We can look into it.
Yeah, well, yeah, go ahead, Kathy.
Thank you. Can you all hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Miracle. Well, there was an issue with the link sent to me, so I apologize. Let me look into that. There is some bill that is moving forward, and let me, with that, I want to say it has passed the Senate, but I will double check on that and report back.
Yeah, because it impacts, I think it's going to codify really going forward what the emergency order was. And I got the impression that we're going to be able to do these electronic meetings permanently, potentially.
I do think that bill's moving forward. But I think we'll double check it. But I do think it is moving forward because it's an important issue of how people can
Well,
can work.
especially for our group, it's really gonna potentially impact, how we do business. So I think we need to understand that. So,
There is
Thank you.
somewhat of a fallback position. The prior statute references did allow for remote participation. You just had to have a physical location and a majority or
That's
the quorum present, and then others could be remote. So
right.
it's not a blanket, we're out of luck.
No,
But it becomes a lot more logistically challenged.
Exactly. Yeah.
I
So-
know I have done a select board meeting from California once prior. I was on the phone with them, and it is a lot clunkier. So
Yes.
I'm hoping that this will go through.
Okay. And my only other thing is scheduling of Jane.
Yeah, a quick check. It's Senate Bill 95. It's
95.
remote meetings. It passed the Senate and it's now in the House.
Okay.
Okay.
But wouldn't it have been acted on, Jim, before now, if it was going to be passed?
I think it's the crossover.
Yeah, it's a bill that it
It's
passed through the
originated in the
Senate, so
Senate.
it has gone
Right.
over to the House, right?
Okay, got it. All right, good. So we'll wait to see. So the only other thing I had was scheduling the full meeting and our next meeting before we adjourn.
Okay.
So, full meeting, we had talked about next Monday. Are we in a position to be able to do that? Or are we thinking it will be later? What is your preference? Because we're kind of on call with the rest of the group, right? Jim?
If Jim feels that we'll be ready by Monday, I can do
I mean,
it on
I
the
s-
26th.
Certainly, I don't think it's going to take much to update the document for our conversation today. And so I'm certainly comfortable doing that. And if everyone is available, then next Monday would be fine, I think.
Okay.
Right.
So pencil it in on the 26th at 11.
Yeah, I
Okay.
just didn't want the rest of the group to wait much longer. I'd like to have some sort of regularness to our meetings, not have too long between meetings, because I think we lose interest if we're not updating them.
I think you're right.
Phil?
Mark, I might have a problem making that meeting, but I'll most likely be able to do it by phone versus Zoom. So I may be a
Okay.
little late.
Okay. All right, good. So we will plan Monday, 11 o'clock.
Okay.
And Jim you'll get the notice out by Wednesday, Thursday?
Yep.
Okay. Very good. Any other business that anyone, Paul?
Yeah, and I hope Jane will chime in on this too, because we've talked a bit, and although we're very appreciative of the deference the joint board's given to us, particularly inviting us to be participants in your meetings, it leaves us both in a little awkward position because we don't serve a function on the committee. We've supported the committee because we were so intimately involved in the organizing effort, but we're feeling a little strange in terms of what our role is, being active participants but not being on the joint board. And I don't want any other member to feel like the city of Portsmouth or Newington are getting preferential treatment. So I just put that out there. What role or status or definition do you want our continued contributions to make? Jane, please add.
I think that was perfectly accurately said. I have nothing to add. We certainly want to help in any way that we can, but as Paul mentions, is now we do have the joint board and members, and so we will look forward to your your thoughts on this.
I look at both of you as resource in solid caps, resource. You have, helped us through all of this, and we do appreciate it.
Well, yeah, and I'll second that, Joy. And I know for myself personally, the expertise that you bring and the knowledge that you guys are tracking this so closely, I certainly would put it as an agenda item if it would help make you feel better. But I think personally, if you have the time to be able to help by being a resource to the joint board, I certainly appreciate the input. If you would be more comfortable if we ask the entire membership so that we make sure that everybody's comfortable with it. I'm willing to do that. But if you're okay continuing to participate, that's fine with me as well as a resource.
My effort in bringing this up is not to withdraw my assistance that I've provided, and I believe that's Jane's position too. It's just maybe we're hyper vigilant in making sure that it's very transparent that we do so on a voluntary basis, that we have no official role other than at the request of the joint board to assist them in any manner they seek assistance in. I'm more than willing to continue that role so long as that role is I guess, publicly stated and understood by all and not called into question at some later date.
I think we all recognize that you two bring a tremendous amount of expertise and historical knowledge of this situation. And I don't know about the others, but I feel much better relying on some of your knowledge. I am just a babe in the woods on this. So I just do really appreciate everything the two of you have brought to this problem.
I think so long as if people understand that we're assisting in the process and not.
Right, you don't
the
vote,
process.
we'll make it very
Right.
clear you don't vote and everything else. And Jim,
Right.
I just want you to know too, that this isn't any reflection on you. I think Paul and Jane just have done so much work even before the coalition communities started getting together that having both of them here certainly helps us. And I want to make the best decisions for the entire group. So
No, Mark, I completely agree. And it's been a pleasure working with all of you thus far. So it's a good team.
good. All right. Well, I will definitely bring that up, Paul. Thank you for mentioning that, and we'll make sure that the other communities share that as well. And I'm gonna just let people know that you're assisting and regularly participating, and I'll make sure that people contact me if they have an issue.
We're an advisory role.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. Okay. Good. Anything else? All right, so next meeting will be next Monday of the entire group. And at the end of that meeting, we will schedule the next joint board meeting based on the results of that entire group meeting. All right? Good. See you all at 11 o'clock next week. Thank you for your time. Really-
Motion to adjourn.
All right, Joy's made the motion.
I'll second it.
All right, so we are all approved. Okay.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Have a good week, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman team.
Take care.
Bye-bye.